What if I told you the Chaos Gods weren't born from humanity, as countless scholars of the Imperium claim? That the origin of the entities who would one day twist the minds of mortals, seduce entire civilizations, and drown the galaxy in blood and fire, predates the rise of mankind by eons? Long before the Emperor raised his gaze upon the stars, before the first human civilization took its faltering steps toward dominance, something far older and far more cataclysmic tore the warp asunder. The seed of chaos was not sown by mortal sin, nor by human ambition. It was the echo of a war that shook reality itself. The war in heaven? Across the black void of the pre-imperial cosmos, mighty civilizations of alien origin clashed in a conflict so vast that its tremors still echo in the warp today. The Necrontyr, fragile and dying, sought immortality and vengeance against the universe that had scorned them. Their tools were the Tan, the star gods, beings of pure energy and hunger, whose appetites could consume suns. And yet, they were not alone. The Old Ones, ancient architects of reality, whose mastery over life and the warp was near godlike, sought to shape the universe in patterns of balance and order. Their enemies were uncountable, their ambitions unknowable, and the battlefield was no less than the very soul of existence. When the war in heaven ignited, it wasn't a clash of armies as we understand them. Entire stars were shattered. Worlds were erased. The laws of reality themselves bent under the weight of the Old One's psychic might and the Necrotyr's mechanical horrors. And somewhere in the swirling chaos between, the warp, the immaterial reflection of thought, emotion, and psychic resonance, began to writhe and bleed. It was in this crucible of unbridled power that the first stirrings of the beings we would one day call the Chaos Gods began to emerge. Picture the warp as it truly is, an endless ocean of sentient energy, a mirror of the psyche of the living universe. Each shockwave of grief, anger, pride, and ambition from the Old Ones, each scream of a dying Necrontyr, each pulse of the Kinsa's hunger, twisted that ocean into strange new currents. These were not mere thoughts, they were cataclysms of psychic energy. And from these violent eddies, life took a form no mind could have anticipated. Entities of pure emotion, predators of the immaterial, feeding not on flesh, but on the psychic echoes of conflict. Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, they were born not of humanity, but of the universe's first nightmares, shaped in the psychic fallout of a war beyond comprehension. The Old One's victory was Pyrrhic. Though they triumphed over the Necrontyr and shattered the Catan into fragments, the warp had already been irreversibly scarred. The echoes of their colossal psychic energies lingered, seeding the raw emotions that would one day coalesce into the four ruinous powers. Imagine the first anger of Khorne as it took form, the smell of ozone and blood in the warp as a psychic residue. Or Tzeentch, whose scheming mind mirrored the endless plots of the Old Ones, twisted and reshaped by the mutating energies around it. Even Nurgle's patience, Slaanesh's excess, each a reflection of the universe's first experiences with death, decay, and indulgence. They were the byproducts of a cosmos that had already learned violence. But this was no tidy genesis. The Chaos Gods did not appear as fully formed deities, glowing with power and purpose. They were infant storms, awareness flickering in the darkness. And like all storms, they hungered for more. Their early interactions with the few sentient beings left by the war in heaven shattered races, fragile survivors, fed them in ways the Old Ones had never anticipated. Every scream, every act of cruelty, every spark of ambition amplified them. By the time humanity arose in the Milky Way, the Chaos Gods were already ancient in their own way, their consciousnesses honed by eons of observation and consumption. Humanity did not create them, they merely became one more feast, a new canvas for their ever-growing appetites. It is here that history often lies to itself. The Imperium teaches that humanity's sins birthed chaos, that our ambition and bloodlust gave rise to the dark gods. But the truth is far more unsettling. Chaos was already awake, already ravenous, already weaving its strands into reality long before the first human emperor took throne. or the first psyker was born. Human emotions merely resonate with pre-existing tides in the warp, and the stronger our emotions, the more the chaos gods swell. Humanity is not the cause, they are the amplification. And in that lies both our curse and our greatest weapon. If we can understand the origin, perhaps we can anticipate their hunger. Perhaps we can see the currents before they drag us under. Consider the consequences of the war in heaven beyond the warp itself. Entire species were exterminated, ecosystems erased, and the psychic scars it left lingered like deep space radiation. The old ones, despite their mastery, could not repair the fabric of reality entirely. The Necrontyrs' remnants would eventually find their way into the tomb worlds, their hatred encoded in the very bones of their machines. And yet, the Chaos Gods endured. They watched, patient and inexorable, as the galaxy slowly filled with life and civilization organisms and empires to feed upon, a chessboard of hopes and fears. The war in heaven was not the birth of chaos alone. It was the creation of the rules by which the galaxy would live or die for eons. And still, for all the grandeur and horror, the story of the Chaos God's emergence is incomplete without recognizing the poetry of the universe's cruelty. The old ones, the architects of life, the stewards of order, were undone not by hubris alone, but by the very consequences of their victories. Every act of creation carried the seeds of destruction. Every psychic manipulation in the warp left a scar where new predators could take root. The universe is not just a battlefield, it is a crucible, forging entities whose appetites will never be sated. To see the Chaos Gods as mere abstract evils is to misunderstand them. They are the universe itself, unbound, unfiltered, and merciless. We can only glimpse their infancy, scattered shards of consciousness born from cosmic devastation. Yet their influence is tangible. The tremor of psychic waves in the warp, the sudden madness of a distant colony, the whisper of forbidden knowledge that drives the most loyal of psychers to despair. They are older than humanity, older than the stars that dot the night sky, and every battle fought in their name is merely a ripple from their initial creation. The war in heaven was not simply a war. It was a universe-defining event that birthed predators in a dimension of thought and desire, and these predators would never forget. And so, when the Imperium claims that human sin gave rise to chaos, it does so with ignorance and with fear. The truth is more terrible. Chaos came first. Humanity merely stumbled into its shadow. And as the galaxy teeters on the brink of perpetual war, as the psychers cry out and the demons stir, we are left to wonder if these gods were born in the psychic fires of a war we cannot fully comprehend. What does that make us? Pawns, prey, or something more dangerous still, an unintentional catalyst for powers we can never hope to fully control. Yet, there are hints, scattered whispers of forbidden lore, that the war in heaven was not merely a tragedy. Some texts suggest that the old ones, in their final acts, embedded safeguards within the warp, tiny anchors of order meant to counterbalance the chaos they had unwittingly nurtured. But these anchors are weak, fragmented, and their locations lost to time. The question remains, can the galaxy ever escape the legacy of that first war? Can any being hope to stand against the very psychic echoes that gave birth to divinity itself? Or is the Milky Way fated to tremble eternally beneath the shadow of the Chaos Gods, as it has since the dawn of time? And somewhere beyond the edge of known space, in a place where reality thins and the stars themselves seem to quiver, the infant Chaos Gods stir, hungry, aware, patient, watching the galaxy they were born to consume. And the universe waits, silent and trembling, for the next act in a drama that began long before humanity, long before the Imperium, long before hope itself. But what if the war in heaven was not the first spark? What if something even older, something far stranger and more insidious, nudged the first tremors in the warp before the old ones or the Necrontyr? Something whose name is too terrible to speak, whose presence the galaxy only feels as unease, madness, and the whisper of eternity itself. The galaxy trembles in silence, yet even in that stillness, the whispers of the war in heaven never ceased. On the fringe of known space, in a system abandoned for millennia, an Imperial exploration fleet discovered a shattered world, its surface scarred by impossible energies. Mountains were split as if cleaved by the hands of gods, and seas of molten metal boiled under a sun that had long since turned to black. The historian archivist aboard the lead vessel sensed the warp's subtle tug here, an unnatural resonance that felt almost aware. As he traced the energy patterns across ruined citadels and shattered spires, he realized that what had been written as myth might be only fragments of the truth. The war in heaven left more than echoes. It left imprints, psychic footprints of the earliest entities that would become chaos. And within these imprints, secrets lay hidden, threatening to reshape the Imperium's understanding of its own origins. A lone space marine, Sergeant Kale of the Ultramarines, strode through the ruins, his ceramite armor echoing with the clang of every careful step. Dust and ash swirled around him, catching the dim, coruscating light of the shattered sun. Each statue he passed depicted forms that defied comprehension, some vaguely humanoid, others utterly alien, their faces twisted in expressions of eternal agony or ecstatic triumph. Kale's augmented vision picked up traces of psychic resonance, faintly glowing threads that pulsed like veins through the stone. He paused at a monolithic structure, feeling the weight of millennia pressing down. Here, he thought, perhaps the first sparks of the Chaos Gods had truly been born, not in the petty struggles of humanity, but in the ambitions, fears, and passions of entities far older and far more terrible. The knowledge came with a suffocating awareness. The galaxy was never meant for mortals, and yet here they were, stumbling blindly into the aftermath of unimaginable power. In another sector, an Imperial scholar named Ileana pored over a collection of forbidden texts, recovered from the archives of a derelict Adeptus Mechanicus outpost. The pages hummed faintly with residual psychic energy, the ink shifting as if alive. Each script described events that predated humanity, wars that had shattered the very essence of reality, alliances formed and betrayed in the space between stars, and entities whose names could unravel a mortal mind. Ileana realized that the Imperium's doctrine was incomplete at best, deliberately misleading at worst. The Chaos Gods were not reactive creations, they were survivors, predators shaped in the crucible of cosmic violence, their hunger predating mankind by millions of years. Every human act of sin was merely a feast for their already ancient appetites. The truth was horrifying. The galaxy's history was not a march of progress toward order, but a stage upon which ancient predators had long rehearsed their domination. As the fleet scanned deeper into the system, sensors picked up a faint signal emanating from beneath the world's shattered crust. Kale led a detachment into the bowels of a collapsed citadel, and what they discovered defied comprehension. A chamber massive beyond imagination, carved from a single mineral that shimmered with the colors of the warp itself, pulsed with life or perhaps with the memory of life. Within it floated inscriptions that spoke of the Old One's final acts. They had attempted to bind the infant chaos, to tether the fledgling gods to patterns of order, but their efforts had faltered. The symbols themselves radiated a psychic scream, a lamentation of failure that echoed through Kale's mind. Each thought, each breath, felt like wading through centuries of grief, anger, and ambition. The battlefield of the war in heaven, once thought lost to time, had left a scar here, a scar that humanity was only beginning to recognize. Meanwhile, aboard the exploration fleet, Ileana traced correlations between the ruins and the texts, revealing a shocking convergence. The Chaos Gods were not born from mortal emotion. They were the product of the first great manipulations of life and thought, of the Old One's attempts to impose order, and the Necrunter's rage against existence itself. The very fabric of reality had been twisted, creating entities whose hunger and cunning would far exceed anything humanity could produce. Every human struggle was a shadow play upon the stage set long before their rise. And yet, The scholar could not ignore the patterns. The Chaos God's attention always lingered where life flourished. Mortals were not creators of these gods, but their chosen arena, a living canvas on which ancient hunger would paint anew. Beyond the system, the warp itself began to stir. The subtle energies traced by Kale and Ileana manifested into shadowed apparitions, fleeting glimpses of forms that defied mortal understanding. They were fragments of thought, of consciousness, from beings that had existed before the stars coalesced. These forms whispered in a language that was felt more than heard, planting seeds of terror, awe, and understanding simultaneously. Kale struggled to maintain focus, clutching his bolter as visions of armies wreathed in fire and impossibly massive beings clashing in the void filled his mind. The war in heaven, he realized, had never ended. It had only shifted theaters, moving from the timeless void of ancient stars to the fragile, flickering civilizations that now dotted the Milky Way. The psychic storm reached a crescendo when a fissure in reality itself appeared within the ancient chamber. From it emerged tendrils of raw warp energy, forming shapes that hinted at Korn's bloodlust, Tzinch's cunning, Nurgle's persistence, and Slaanesh's insatiable desire. Yet these were embryonic, not yet fully aware, echoes of their former and future selves. Kale fired upon them, bolter rounds disintegrating against incorporeal forms, while Ileana muttered prayers and incantations, attempting to read and stabilize the text's chaotic power. For the first time, the mortal participants understood the scale of their hubris. They were not merely explorers, they were intruders in a place where creation and destruction had danced for eons. And the warp, patient and remorseless, was watching. A moment of grim clarity settled over the chamber as Kale realized the terrible truth. The war in heaven had not simply shaped the warp, it had left behind tools, traps, and consequences of unimaginable subtlety. The Chaos Gods were not passive predators. They were deliberate, learning from the ancient conflicts, calculating, and preparing. Each mortal act of sin, each act of heroism or treachery, added threads to their understanding. Humanity was more than prey, it was a dataset, a proving ground, and a weapon against itself. And the knowledge brought no comfort, only an oppressive sense of futility. Every victory in the galaxy, every loyalist crusade, was already woven into the tapestry of chaos grand design. As the detachment ascended from the ruins, the psychic residue coalesced into a vision of staggering scale, the galaxy as it might be, consumed not by war alone, but by entities who had watched civilizations rise and fall for eons. They were older than the stars, hungrier than the oldest predator, and infinitely patient. Kale's voice shook as he transmitted a report to the fleet command, warning of the danger, the ancient origin of the forces they would face. Ileana added her own findings, the texts now fully understood in context. The story of the Chaos Gods, once told as a morality lesson for human arrogance, was far older, far deeper, and far more terrifying than any doctrine could contain. Night fell upon the shattered world, though night held little meaning under the dim light of the dead sun. The survivors of the mission watched the psychic echoes swirl above the ruined spires, seeing shapes that were almost but not entirely familiar. Somewhere within the storm of memory and emotion, the infant Chaos Gods observed the intruders, noting their courage, their curiosity, and their arrogance. It was a quiet moment, filled with awe, dread, and understanding. The galaxy had shifted, and the scale of the game was only now becoming visible. The war in heaven had left more than scars. It had left legacies, and humanity had stumbled straight into them. But in the midst of this revelation, a new signal pulsed across the fleet's sensors, originating from a region untouched by their explorations. Unlike the psychic echoes they had encountered, the signal was deliberate, rhythmic, almost communicative. Ileana recognized patterns reminiscent of the Old One's final acts, but distorted, overlaid with something alien, unknown, and terrifying. Whatever lay beyond the next system could be a remnant of the Old Ones, or something far more dangerous, a force older than the war in heaven itself, one that had observed the rise and fall of the Chaos Gods and had remained hidden, silent, and patient. The fleet commander ordered preparations for immediate investigation, and Kale readied his warriors, knowing instinctively that what they would confront might define the fate of humanity itself. As the fleet advanced toward the unknown, the ruined world behind them seemed to shiver, the psychic scars echoing one final warning. The war in heaven was not merely history. It was a living shadow, reaching forward across time and space. And somewhere in the dark, the whisper of the first Chaos Gods promised that no mortal could fully comprehend the depths of what had been unleashed. Humanity was a candle in a tempest, flickering against storms older than memory. And yet, even in that storm, a question remained. What force had watched the war in heaven from the shadows, and what would it demand in return for the folly of civilizations, yet unborn? The answer, Kale and Ileana knew, awaited them in the next system. But to reach it would demand courage, sacrifice, and the acceptance of truths that could shatter their minds. The galaxy held its breath, and the ruins of a dead world bore silent witness to the awakening of something far older and far more terrible than even the Chaos Gods themselves. The fleet drifted into the heart of the uncharted system, its ships like silver phantoms against the black expanse, each hull groaning under the weight of millennia-old psychic turbulence. A faint, rhythmic pulse emanated from the largest planet, a signal unlike anything the Adeptus Mechanicus had catalogued. It was almost musical, yet discordant, resonating through the very souls of those aboard. Sergeant Kale's bolter felt heavier in his hands, and the usually unflappable ultramarine sensed a disturbance not just in the warp, but in the immutable laws of reason and order. The world below was a tapestry of jagged spires and floating debris, remnants of civilizations too ancient for even the most thorough Imperial records. Smoke rose in unnatural spirals from collapsed cities, and the air shimmered as though reality itself had been stretched thin. Something waited below, patient and intelligent, and the first tremors of fear touched even Kale's ironclad resolve. Descending to the surface, Kale and his squad moved through ruins that seemed to pulse with life, or perhaps memory. Each step released whispers, half-formed visions of creatures older than the oldest stars. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and the echoes of ancient screams seemed to layer over the sound of their own armored footsteps. Ileana, moving beside them, traced runes etched into shattered walls, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. The inscriptions hinted at a civilization that had witnessed the birth of the warp's predators firsthand, entities that predated even the war in heaven. Here, in the hushed corridors of this alien tomb, the line between myth and reality blurred. Every revelation gnawed at their faith, for if the Chaos Gods were born before humanity, then the Emperor's centuries-long battle was not the first, nor was it purely righteous. It was an echo of a far older struggle. The deeper they ventured, the air grew heavy with psychic tension. Kale's enhanced senses picked up subtle shifts, a resonance that hummed beneath the surface of the ruins. Shadows coalesced into shapes that were almost recognizable, forms of beasts and humanoids, twisted into grotesque parodies of life, their eyes empty pools reflecting the squad's fears. Bolter fire tore through a wall of ephemeral tendrils, but the shapes recoiled and reformed, indifferent to death. It became clear that the world was alive in the warp, or at least the memory of life, a psychic record of countless eons of suffering, ambition, and slaughter. For the first time, Kale questioned the nature of his duty. The galaxy's enemy was not only the Chaos Gods or their mortal worshippers, it was the universe itself, a predator with infinite patience, whose lessons were written in blood and oblivion. In the bowels of the planet, they discovered the first true anomaly, a chamber carved from an iridescent mineral that seemed to absorb light and sound. Ileana approached the central dais, where a pulsating orb hovered, vibrating with a frequency that set nerves on edge. Touching it, she glimpsed visions, the old ones in council, the Necrontyr rising in rage and the first stirrings of what would become Khorne, Tzeentch, Nurgle, and Slaanesh. But then the vision shifted, revealing something older, darker, an intelligence observing the war in heaven, untouched, calculating, and omnipotent in its patience. The realization was unbearable. The Chaos Gods were not the first predators of the warp. Something else, something older than even the old ones, had orchestrated events from the shadows, guiding, nudging, waiting for civilizations like humanity to emerge. The squad staggered back as the orb pulsed violently, projecting their worst fears in tangible form. Kale saw the faces of comrades lost in wars he had not yet fought, cities consumed by fire, and the Emperor's throne world shattered. Bolter rounds ignited against the apparition, but they had no effect. Every strike of violence seemed to feed the intelligence, granting it clarity and form. Kale's heart, normally steeled against fear, felt the weight of eternity pressing upon it. Duty no longer seemed enough. Survival itself was fragile, and faith a flickering candle in the void. The old certainties, the righteousness of the Emperor, the inevitability of victory over chaos, crumbled under the sheer scale of what they now faced. Ilyana deciphered more of the alien inscriptions, and her voice trembled as she spoke. The text suggested a hierarchy of warp entities, ancient beings whose existence had been carefully hidden from even the most learned scholars. The Chaos Gods, once thought omnipotent, were merely one tier among many, born of events orchestrated by forces whose motives were unfathomable. Every act of human rebellion, every heresy, every campaign against chaos had already been accounted for by these higher predators who moved subtly through the fabric of reality. Humanity was not central to the cosmos. It was a pawn, an instrument of forces older than stars, and yet it bore the burden of divine expectations. As they progressed, the ruins became increasingly surreal. Spires twisted impossibly, defying geometry. Rivers of molten metal flowed uphill, and distant shadows flickered in and out of existence, leaving only the echo of distorted laughter or cries. Kale felt the strain of his armor as though the very atmosphere resisted their passage. His squad mates whispered prayers, some quietly muttering to themselves, others silently questioning the adequacy of faith itself. The psychic presence they encountered was intelligent, adaptive, and patient. It observed not only their actions but their emotions, probing weaknesses, feeding on despair, and reflecting their deepest fears back upon them. Suddenly, a fissure in the terrain opened beneath them, spewing a torrent of iridescent energy that seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. From it rose entities that were simultaneously alien and familiar, flickers of the Chaos God's forms, but incomplete, raw, and hungry. Kale's instincts screamed that these were not fully realized beings. They were embryonic predators, formed from the memory of the war in heaven, yet influenced by something far older. The squad opened fire, but the entities moved as though time itself bent around them. Ilyana screamed in psychic agony as visions of future atrocities unfolded. Entire systems consumed, loyalist crusades shattered, and the Emperor's dream teetering on the edge of annihilation. The full weight of the universe's indifference pressed upon them, revealing the cost of knowledge and the fragility of mortals confronting cosmic truths. In a moment of clarity, Kale realized the terrible possibility. The intelligence guiding these events was testing them, evaluating humanity's potential. Every act of courage, every moment of despair, every choice made under fire could determine the galaxy's trajectory. And yet, this same intelligence could remain indifferent, allowing civilizations to perish as easily as stars burn out. The squad's fight became both literal and metaphysical, their bolters firing not just at enemies, but at the very concepts of inevitability and despair. Each volley illuminated the ruins in bursts of white-hot light, revealing fleeting glimpses of the warped, pulsating architecture of a civilization older than memory. Ilyana, her mind straining against the psychic onslaught, realized another truth. The war in heaven and all its aftermath had been only the opening act. humanity the Imperium, and even the Chaos Gods themselves were players in a story authored by entities beyond reckoning. What they had witnessed in the ruins was a fragment of a far larger scheme, a design whose end could not yet be glimpsed. And in that realization, a deeper horror emerged. The Chaos Gods, terrifying as they were, might themselves be bound, manipulated, or observed by something greater, something patient, deliberate, and infinitely cunning. As the squad retreated to the surface, the world itself seemed to pulse in recognition of their departure, its ruins shivering with anticipation. Kale's armor was scorched, his mind heavy with visions of future wars, betrayals, and unimagined horrors. Ileana clutched her codex tightly. The inscriptions burned into her consciousness as both a weapon and a curse. Together, they looked out over the shattered landscape, realizing that their understanding of the galaxy had fractured irreparably. No longer was the story of the Chaos Gods one of simple origin. It was a multi-layered tapestry of predation, manipulation, and cosmic design. And somewhere, in the void between stars, the older intelligence waited, silent and patient, watching the small flickers of human defiance, calculating the next move. In the sky above, the shattered sun dimmed further, casting long cold shadows over the ruined spires. Kale spoke quietly to himself, a rare moment of doubt breaking through his disciplined exterior. If the galaxy itself is prey, then what hope exists for humanity? And as the question left his lips, the psychic pulse returned, stronger, deliberate, and almost conversational, as though the universe itself had replied. They had glimpsed the edges of a truth too vast to comprehend, a truth that would demand sacrifice, courage, and perhaps betrayal. The war in heaven had ended, but its consequences were only beginning. And in that silence, one horrifying certainty emerged. Whatever watched from beyond time and stars would not wait for humanity's next move, it would shape it. Kale's bolter felt impossibly heavy as he stared into the abyss, and Ileana shivered, knowing that the next revelation would change everything. The galaxy held its breath, the ruins pulsed, and the warp itself whispered a single, undeniable truth. The story of the Chaos Gods was not the story of humanity. It was the story of powers far older, far crueler, and far more patient. And humanity, for all its ambition and faith, was now caught in a game whose rules were written in the stars before they had ever existed. The void was no longer silent. Across the uncharted system, the psychic pulse that had haunted Kale and Ileana intensified, vibrating through every ship hull, every ceramite joint, every fragile human heart aboard the fleet. Stars seemed to shiver in their sockets, light bending as if reality itself hesitated. The Eye of Terror, though distant in origin, felt near, its shadow stretching across the very edge of known space. Kale stood at the prow of the lead ship, the void reflected in his helm visor like a black mirror, knowing instinctively that what waited below was no mere relic, it was a threshold. Ileana beside him traced glyphs in the air, her voice trembling as she muttered forbidden prayers, feeling the intelligence they had glimpsed before, now awakened fully, impatient and deliberate. Every instinct screamed that the galaxy was about to tip, that the fragile balance of war and order would shatter under the weight of ancient hunger. The fleet descended onto the planet's surface once more, greeted by an eerie calm. Smoke from previous explorations drifted lazily, yet the ruins seemed to pulse with anticipation, as though aware of their intrusion. Kale's squad moved in tactical formation, every step measured, bolter ready. The air was thick with ozone and the metallic tang of psychic energy, making lungs burn and thoughts tremble. Above them, the sky shimmered with unnatural auroras, a visible distortion of the warp that set nerves on edge. Shadows stretched impossibly, sometimes moving of their own volition, sometimes converging into forms that resembled nightmares glimpsed in fleeting visions. The squad's discipline was tested. Every man felt the weight of millennia pressing down. Here, amidst the ruins of civilizations that predated humanity, they confronted a truth older than their oaths. The galaxy was a battlefield not merely of mortals, but of incomprehensible, patient, and calculating predators. Ileana paused before a fractured spire, her codex trembling in her hands as the inscriptions glowed with a sickly golden light. Her vision swam with the first stirrings of prophecy, fragments of Old One's designs intertwined with the chaos-born entities they had already encountered. "They're preparing," she whispered, voice breaking under psychic strain. "The warp itself. It is shaping them, guiding them, making them ready." Kale's gaze swept the horizon, recognizing the subtle choreography of energy, as if the planet itself were a stage. The Chaos Gods, or their embryonic forms, were learning, observing, anticipating, not in the raw, impulsive hunger of youth, but with a patience that spanned eons. And as their awareness grew, so did the tension in the air. The planet vibrated with imminent revelation, a pulse that was both beckoning and warning, and even the ultramarine stoic courage began to crack beneath it. A sudden tremor split the ground beneath them, throwing Kale to his knees and scattering his squad. The ruins themselves seemed alive, walls flexing and groaning as if exhaling after a long slumber. Through the fissures rose tendrils of energy, radiant yet corrupted, wrapping the remnants of the spire in a spectral embrace. From them, forms began to emerge, shapes at first amorphous, then solidifying into monstrous, awe-inspiring silhouettes that hinted at the Chaos Gods' archetypes, yet were incomplete, raw, and driven by some unseen intelligence. Kale fired his bolter, each shot detonating harmlessly against the incorporeal forms. Screams of awe and fear pierced the air as the squad realized they faced not simply enemies, but glimpses of beings who had watched the galaxy unfold before mortal eyes had even opened. The psychological weight was suffocating. Each warrior felt his own sins and failures amplified, mirrored back with relentless scrutiny. Ileana stepped closer to the glowing fissure, her codex now aflame with symbols she had never seen before. Visions flooded her mind, the Primarchs, not yet divided by betrayal or loyalty, standing amidst storms of psychic fire. Worlds burned in ritualized combat, the screams of billions echoing as fuel for entities that had existed before time. The Emperor, seated upon a throne of gold and starlight, watching, planning, agonizing over choices whose consequences stretched into infinity. Every image was a shard of understanding, yet incomplete, leaving terror in its gaps. She realized then that the prophecies of old were not mere warnings. They were instructions, warnings written in a code only partially comprehensible to mortals. The galaxy's fate was being rehearsed in shadow, and their intrusion had triggered the final act's preparation. The surface convulsed again, and the embryonic chaos forms solidified further, their movements more deliberate, more intelligent. Kale's squad found themselves flanked by impossibilities, spires twisting into impossible geometries, shadows detaching and moving with will, walls that bled whispers of strategy and doom. Each step forward required immense willpower, bolters blazing and combat blades slicing through forms that flickered between existence and dream. Even the stoic warriors of Ultramar could feel the strain on their minds, a psychic friction born not from malice, but from calculation and attention. Every heartbeat echoed with the sense that they were being evaluated, measured for worth, courage, resilience, and faith. Ileana's voice rose above the psychic din, decoding a sequence that suggested the planet itself was a key locus in a grander cosmic mechanism. This world. "It's a gate," she cried, voice trembling with terror and revelation. Not to a place, but to an awakening. Kale's eyes scanned the horizon, and in the distance, a colossal rift tore the sky in two, a shimmering tear through which starlight bent unnaturally, and the edge of the warp seemed to drip into the material universe. It was the threshold, the eye's shadow stretching forward, a curtain being drawn back to reveal forces that had long remained hidden. The embryonic chaos entities were converging on it, drawn not by instinct alone, but by recognition, responding to some signal older than their own existence. As the rift widened, the planet itself seemed to groan with psychic resonance, echoing the prayers and screams of countless lost civilizations. Kale realized the terrible consequence. If this gateway fully opened, the embryonic chaos forms would gain clarity, cohesion, and sentience at a scale that dwarfed even the Imperium's nightmares. Ileana's visions intensified. She saw billions of souls across the galaxy resonating in unison, feeding the rift, as if the entire Milky Way were a loom weaving the Chaos God's return to full power. Every mortal act of defiance or faith became a thread in a cosmic tapestry far older and more dangerous than anything humanity had dared to imagine. Amidst the rising psychic storm, a single, horrifying realization struck Kale. Their intrusion, their curiosity, had accelerated events. The rift pulsed in response to them, a predator stirring faster because it sensed the hunter's presence. Every hesitation, every act of courage, every prayer, or shouted command rippled through the warp, feeding entities older than gods themselves. Kale's hands shook as he gripped his bolter tighter. The universe no longer felt static or stable. It was alive, aware, and infinitely patient. He understood in a bone-deep way that the coming storm was not just the awakening of chaos, but the convergence of forces that had been waiting since the birth of the galaxy. From the edge of the rift, whispers began to coalesce into voices, not threatening, yet full of cold calculation. They spoke in the cadence of inevitability, a language older than memory, promising knowledge, power, and terror in equal measure. Kale and his squad felt the lure, the pull of destiny, and the terrifying possibility that some truths were meant not to be faced, but to break the mind that confronted them. Ileana's codex emitted a blinding flash, inscribing one final glyph she could not comprehend fully, yet its meaning resonated in the marrow of her bones. The gate was a test, but also a signal, a calling to something the galaxy had long feared, yet could not name. The planet trembled violently, fissures widening, spires collapsing, and tendrils of warp energy streaming outward. Kale's warriors formed defensive positions, yet the enemy they faced was both everywhere and nowhere. The embryonic chaos entities now moved with purpose, converging at the rift, their forms partially realized, pulsing with the first hints of cognition. Ileana screamed as visions of the future overwhelmed her, entire chapters of space marines standing against tidal waves of warp-born horrors, heroes martyred before their names could be spoken, worlds consumed, and yet patterns repeating, as though the galaxy were caught in a looping design. In the midst of the chaos, Kale experienced an unbearable truth. They were not only observers, they were participants. Every choice, every act of defiance, every moment of hesitation was feeding the rift, accelerating the awakening of the forces they'd barely understood. The Eye of Terror's shadow stretched fully across the system, a gaping maw in space that threatened to consume the very light of the stars. The embryonic chaos gods pulsed in recognition, their attention drawn irrevocably to the intruders, aware of the mortal presence as a catalyst. Kale realized that the coming confrontation would not be a battle of fire and bolter alone. It would be a war of will, of understanding, and of faith under impossible pressure. Ileana fell to her knees, tears streaking her dust-blackened face, the codex still burning with ethereal fire. "We've awoken something that was never meant to awaken," she whispered. Kale knelt beside her, gripping his bolter like a lifeline, feeling the immensity of centuries pressing upon him. The rift stretched wider, and the embryonic chaos forms, now coherent in part, swirled with anticipation. The Eye of Terror had extended a finger into the material universe, and the galaxy's precarious balance teetered on the brink. Everything they thought they understood, the origins of chaos, the role of humanity, even the Emperor's designs, was about to fracture in ways impossible to predict. And then, in the silence before the storm, the psychic chorus of the rift coalesced into a single clear thought. The universe was waiting, and it had noticed them. The threshold had been crossed. The galaxy was about to hold its breath, and Kale, Ileana, and the countless souls across the Imperium were suspended in the trembling pause before revelation, before the eye fully opened, before the first act of the galaxy-shattering truth could unfold. The storm was not coming, it was already here, and the next moment would decide everything. The rift tore open fully, and the system screamed in response. Light bent and fractured, stars flaring in impossible colors, as if reality itself was being unstitched. Kale's squad stood at the edge of the abyss, bolters raised, lungs ragged, hearts hammering with the knowledge that nothing they had fought before could prepare them for this. The embryonic chaos entities solidified into monstrous forms, their shapes now horrifyingly clear blood and flame, malice and cunning, a twisted echo of the gods they would one day become. Yet behind them lurked something else, the older intelligence, the hidden architect whose subtle manipulations had guided the war in heaven and the rise of chaos itself. It observed, calculating, patient, and inevitable, its presence a shadow over every thought and act. Kale realized in a bone-deep certainty that the galaxy was not a battlefield, it was prey. The first surge of psychic energy struck the squad like a hammer. Bolters discharged automatically as tendrils of thought wrapped around their minds. Kale's visor shimmered with visions, the birth of the chaos gods, the death of stars, the first screams of mortals who had long since vanished. Every ounce of his being screamed to flee, yet he rooted himself to the ground, ceramite armor anchoring him as if to the last fragment of sanity in a collapsing universe. Ileana's voice cut through the storm, reciting forbidden passages, her words forming fragile wards of order in the psychic tide. But even her codex shook under the pressure, emitting shrill flashes of light that mirrored the destruction unfolding around them. The rift pulsed, a heartbeat of inevitability, and Kale understood that this moment was a crucible. They would either endure or be erased, their souls recorded as fuel for powers older than time itself. From the rift emerged fragments of memory and reality fused into monstrous clarity, entire civilizations torn apart by psychic storms, the old ones in council as their designs collapsed under unforeseen pressures, the Necrunter's mechanical rage consuming stars. Kale felt his soul stretch under the weight of millennia, 100,000 deaths compressed into a single heartbeat. The chaos entities roared, voices overlapping and echoing with a harmony of cruelty and hunger. They were not yet complete, but they were aware. And then the older intelligence revealed itself, not as form, but as consciousness, shaping the very air around them. Every thought Kale had ever held, every prayer, every moment of defiance, was mirrored, examined, judged. The galaxy itself trembled, a stage for revelations that mortals were never meant to witness. The first clash came in silence. Tendrils of pure psychic energy struck the ground, vaporizing ceramite and stone. Kale leaped into the heart of the attack, firing point blank into the incorporeal forms that swirled around them. Sparks of psychic feedback flared against his armor, searing both mind and flesh. His squad fought beside him, their weapons blazing, every discharge a defiance against inevitability. Yet with each strike, the entities adapted, feeding on both fear and courage, reshaping themselves into forms designed to break hope. Kale realized that conventional tactics were useless. This was no battlefield. This was a trial of the soul, a crucible where faith, willpower, and mortality would be weighed against forces older than stars. Every decision was fatal in potential, yet necessary. Each heartbeat a defiance against the infinite. Amidst the maelstrom, Ileana deciphered the final passages of the Codex. Her voice trembled with awe and terror. The Chaos Gods, the universe itself, they are not first. There is a will behind the will. It orchestrated all of history, all of suffering, all of triumph as a stage for itself. Kale's visor reflected her words, showing not just the rift, but an entire tapestry of predation and manipulation across eons. Every war, every rebellion, every act of heroism was a note in a symphony conducted by something whose motives were unknowable and merciless. The universe, Kale realized, was a predator as old as time, and humanity was not the prey, it was the instrument. The weight of this knowledge struck him like a physical blow, a cold and endless awareness that the galaxy's wars were only shadows of a greater, terrifying truth. Then came the crescendo. The embryonic chaos gods, fully aware and forming their terrifying sentience, surged forward in a wave of psychic fury. Kale felt the pull of their attention, a weight pressing on his mind that threatened to crush his will. The squads staggered under the assault, every sense overwhelmed. Bolters roared, but their fire was symbolic. The real battle was fought in thought and soul. Kale raised his voice, a roar of defiance that cut through the psychic storm. "We do not kneel. Not today, not ever." His words echoed, a single human heartbeat against the eons of cosmic calculation. The entities paused, their awareness flickering with curiosity. Mortality had made a sound, defiance had a shape. And the universe noticed. Ileana reached forward into the rift, hands shaking, codex glowing with ethereal fire. She channeled every ounce of knowledge, every fragment of understanding into a fragile psychic bridge. Through her effort, a conduit formed, connecting the mortal and the ancient. The chaos entities recoiled slightly, confused by the intrusion of comprehension into the raw, untamed power of their awakening. Kale took the opportunity, charging with his squad, striking at the nexus of the rift with bolter and blade. The impact sent shockwaves across the ruins, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to stabilize, the rift's pulsing slowing. They had made a mark, not a victory, but a footprint. A declaration that mortals could resist, however briefly. Yet the cost was immediate. Warriors fell, bolters fused in their hands, minds shattered by psychic backlash. Kale's armor was scorched, his face streaked with blood and ash. Ileana screamed, collapsing as the codex threatened to tear itself apart under the strain. And then came the silence, a terrifying, absolute quiet, as though the universe itself paused to judge their effort. From the rift, the chaos entities recoiled, not defeated, but aware now of the mortal resistance, their attention sharpened. The older intelligence behind them pulsed like a heartbeat through the world, not angry, not pleased, simply watching, waiting for the next move. Every moment of survival was now a challenge, every breath a gamble. Kale stood amidst the ruin, chest heaving, eyes burning with exhaustion and revelation. The sky overhead shimmered, rift expanding slightly, the embryonic chaos gods observing with intent, as if cataloging, learning. He understood in the marrow of his bones that the galaxy's fate was no longer abstract, it was personal. Every world, every chapter, every soldier was a potential catalyst, a note in the symphony of predation. And yet, even as despair threatened, a fragile ember of hope remained. Mortals had marked the rift. They had made the universe pause. It was the smallest act, yet monumental in scale. Ileana finally rose, trembling but resolute, codex pulsing with residual energy. "We've seen the truth," she whispered. "And yet, we remain." The rift pulsed again, slower now, a predator assessing, contemplating, and for the first time allowing a fraction of reprieve. Kale looked at her, seeing not only the scholar, but the embodiment of human defiance and fragility. Together, they understood the reality. The chaos gods would awaken fully, the eye's shadow would extend further, and the intelligence behind it all would continue to manipulate events across time. But humanity had endured. They had left their mark. As the psychic storm ebbed slightly, the ruins lay silent. Bolts of energy still arced in the distance, the air thick with the smell of ozone and burnt stone. The squad gathered what remained, each member a monument to resilience, each wounded soul a testament to defiance. Kale looked up at the rift, the embryonic chaos gods lingering at its threshold, patient and aware. The universe had revealed its cruelty and its scale, and yet, in the midst of revelation and terror, the first embers of possibility glimmered. They had survived, they had witnessed, and the galaxy waited for the next act, trembling on the edge of the eye. In that quiet aftermath, Kale and Ileana understood that the rift was not merely a portal, it was a mirror. It reflected not just the past, but the potential futures, the weight of choices, the cost of defiance, and the inevitability of consequence. And somewhere, in the far reaches of the warp, the older intelligence pulsed once more, calculating, observing, patient. The battle was won in moments, but the war against truth, hunger, and eternity was only beginning. Smoke drifted over the shattered spires. Bolters were silent. Only the whisper of potential, of destiny, and of cosmic hunger remained, setting the stage for the revelations yet to come. The rift had closed, but its echo lingered in the air, a memory of impossible power that hummed through the ruins like a heartbeat. Kale stood at the edge of the shattered spire, bolter held loosely, gaze fixed on the horizon where smoke and dust blurred into the dim light of the dying system. Around him, the surviving members of his squad moved quietly, each weighed down by exhaustion, grief, and the lingering touch of psychic resonance that had scraped the edges of their minds. The embryonic chaos gods were gone, but their presence lingered like a shadow, a reminder of forces beyond comprehension that now slumbered, or perhaps merely observed, waiting for the next ripple to awaken them. Kale's mind turned over the events of days that felt like centuries. The visions, the revelations, the stark understanding that humanity's place in the galaxy had always been precarious and observed by eyes older than the stars themselves. Ilyana knelt beside a fractured monument, her codex still warm with residual energy, the inscriptions now stable but silent. She traced the glyphs with fingers trembling, as though trying to absorb lessons etched in psychic fire. "We saw it," she whispered, voice barely audible, yet carrying across the empty expanse. "All of it. The war in heaven, the first stirrings of chaos, the intelligence behind it. All of it." Her words hung in the cold air, neither triumphant nor defeated, but heavy with the weight of truth. Kale knelt beside her, the silence between them more profound than any battle cry. They had survived, yet the victory felt hollow, a reminder that survival in the 41st millennium was never a triumph, only a temporary reprieve in the endless cycle of predation and war. The ruins themselves seemed to breathe with memory. Walls that had held the psychic scars of eons now stood in silent witness, their twisted forms a testament to civilizations that had risen and fallen before humanity ever reached the stars. Kale's eyes followed the lines of spires and fractured temples, imagining the great beings who had once walked these halls, old ones, Necrontyr, entities that had shaped the cosmos with ambitions and rage that dwarfed human comprehension. And yet, even here, amidst the evidence of millennia, there was the faintest glimmer of order, subtle but persistent, a reminder that even in the most incomprehensible chaos, structure could endure. Humanity, he thought, was nothing more than a fleeting note in the symphony of the cosmos. Yet somehow, the note mattered. As they moved through the dust, Kale reflected on the soldiers they had lost, men and women who had faced the impossible with courage that bordered on the divine. Names that would never be recorded in the annals of the Imperium whispered through his memory, each a testament to resilience in the face of forces no mortal mind could grasp. He realized that the measure of heroism in this galaxy was not victory, but persistence, the choice to stand, to act, to endure when comprehension and hope both failed. Every sacrifice, every act of defiance, had ripples that might echo into futures they would never see. And perhaps, Kale thought, that was the only meaning to be found in a universe that demanded both reverence and ruthlessness, obedience and rebellion, from those who would dare to survive. Ilyana rose, codex clutched to her chest, eyes distant yet focused on some vision no one else could see. "The Chaos Gods," she murmured, "they were never born of us. Humanity is not their origin, only their arena. But we have left a mark, a human mark." Her words carried both pride and sorrow, a realization that even against ancient predators, mortals could leave traces of defiance that mattered, however fleeting. Kale nodded, feeling the cold weight of that truth. For every victory of the past, for every act of cruelty or creation, there existed a constant humanity's capacity for courage, curiosity, and stubborn endurance. Perhaps that, more than doctrine or strategy, was the true inheritance of the Emperor's children. The ability to act in the face of impossibility, to persist where even gods might hesitate. The fleet above remained motionless, a collection of silver phantoms suspended in the dim light, watching as the world below settled into uneasy calm. From orbit, the planet looked like a jewel fractured across time, its scars glittering faintly with psychic memory. Kale climbed to the highest broken spire, looking down over the ruins, seeing both the enormity of what had transpired and the fragility of their own place within it. He wondered at the premarks scattered across the galaxy, each a reflection of flawed divinity, each a player in the same vast game that had begun long before humanity's rise. The choices of those beings, the manipulations of the chaos gods, the secret agendas of intelligence older than comprehension, they all converged here, leaving nothing untouched, nothing pure. Yet amidst it all, he could still see the faint glimmer of agency, the narrow corridor in which mortals could still act, however temporarily. The rift's remnants pulsed faintly on the horizon, a dying heartbeat in the psychic sky. The embryonic chaos gods had withdrawn, yet their attention lingered, like predators observing from a distance, calculating for the next cycle. Kale felt the oppressive weight of inevitability lift slightly, though the memory remained. He realized that the true victory was not conquest, not annihilation, but comprehension. To survive and to bear witness, to understand the scale of forces arrayed against the galaxy, and yet choose to act regardless. The lesson was subtle, almost invisible. In the 41st millennium, the greatest courage was not glory, it was endurance, tempered by understanding and humility. Ileana's gaze shifted skyward, toward the faint shimmer of the distant stars where the Eye of Terror waited patiently. "We cannot stop it," she said softly, almost to herself. "Not fully, but perhaps we can endure it. Perhaps we can bear the weight without being broken." Kale placed a hand on her shoulder, sensing the shared truth of the moment. Knowledge carried a price, but so did ignorance. To act without comprehension was reckless. To stand without courage was surrender. In the quiet aftermath, the balance between understanding and survival became clear, and with it, a new dimension of responsibility. Humanity's place in the galaxy, fragile and impermanent, was defined not by triumph, but by the choice to persist in the face of incomprehensible truth. The camera of thought pulls back, leaving Kale and Ileana upon the fractured spire, small figures against a landscape of millennia, their breaths echoing against the silence. The ruins shimmer with the final traces of psychic fire, a testament to the ancient horrors and incomprehensible intelligence that shaped the cosmos. Across the void, the eye waits. The chaos gods, now aware of mortal interference, linger beyond comprehension, patient and eternal. And yet, the marks of human defiance remain, small yet undeniable, whispers of meaning in a universe that offers none freely. Kale's gaze lingered on the horizon, contemplating the stars. "Are we worth saving?" he murmured. The question hung in the air, unanswered, its weight heavier than any bolter round, heavier than any doctrine or warship. Ileana's hand rested lightly on his arm, her eyes reflecting the fractured light. "Perhaps," she replied, "but perhaps it is not about being worth saving. Perhaps it is only about standing, even when the cost is everything." The ruins whispered around them, carrying echoes of those who had fallen, of empires that had burned, of gods that had risen and slumbered. The wind of the void swept through the broken spires, dust and ash caught in the shimmer of fading psychic echoes. In that stillness, the galaxy seemed to pause, holding its breath, watching the fragile spark of humanity endure against the tide of eternity. Kale and Ileana remained silent, witnesses to the aftermath of a war older than memory, survivors of revelations that might never be understood by any living soul beyond them. In the distance, stars twinkled faintly, indifferent, eternal. and yet somehow participating in the story they had just lived. And somewhere, in the lingering shadow of the eye, the universe waited, patient, vast and unyielding, its lessons written in light, blood, and the fragile, stubborn courage of mortals. And as the camera pulls upward, away from the ruined spire, away from the fleet, away from the world scarred by eons of predation and revelation, one final thought lingers. In a galaxy without mercy, without reason, and without end, what does it truly mean to survive? What is the cost of understanding in a universe that cannot be understood? The stars blinked, distant and eternal, and the answer remained beyond reach, waiting for the next act, the next witness, the next spark of defiance against an eternity of darkness.